Okay, so I might be opening up a can of worms with this one, but there are some topics of discussion that I just feel compelled to give my opinion on, and this is one of them. And that is Shakur Stevenson expressing his view that young black fighters are held to a different standard when it comes to being entertaining in boxing. And I know some of you guys, you're going to hear this headline and you're just going to be shaking your head saying, outmatch, you know what, just don't go there, it's not worth it. But as I say, part of me just feels compelled. And I'm always going to try and give a balanced and level headed opinion. And that's just what I do. And I'm going to attempt to do that here. Yeah, just going to say my piece on what Shakur Stevenson has to say. Now, I've read this article from Boxing Scene, which I'll leave linked in the description box below in case you want to check out for yourself. I'm not going to read through it because even though it's not the longest article, I just don't think it would flow very well because it kind of drops in and out of quotations and it'd be too clunky. To give some context though, Shakur Stevenson seemed to be on some kind of podcast with Andre Ward, and yeah, he's obviously giving his opinion, expressing his view that young black fighters in boxing are just held to a different standard when it comes to being considered entertaining. And it's quite fitting that he's talking to Andre Ward about this because Ward is not only one of Stevenson's mentors or mentor figures in his career, but Andre Ward was also, when he was an active fighter, very often labelled as a boring fighter, as Shakur Stevenson is in the current day. So I guess they kind of resonate with each other on top of already having a very close relationship. But I just want to give some, not context, but I want to preface this video by saying that I understand that where Shakur Stevenson comes from, which is the United States, the United States is a land of extremes. And now you can probably tell from my voice, my accent, that I come from the UK. And the UK is very modest in comparison to the US. The US, as I say, is very extreme. And if you look at the history of the United States, it is a society and a nation that was built on a lot of divide. Many atrocities took place in the history of the United States. And so society, modern society in the US, I feel is very volatile. You can see this in many instances. And yeah, it's even coming from the UK, I can still appreciate that. So I will always take that into consideration when I'm giving my thoughts on someone's experiences, like a Shakur Stevenson, who's a young guy, he's a black guy. And that's going to, in large part, it's going to shape his perception. It's going to shape the kind of experiences he's had throughout his life. But also, you know, for what it's worth, I just want to say that I belong to the white and the black community, in case you couldn't tell by my accent. People always ask me where I'm from. As I say, for what it's worth, I belong to both communities. So I feel that puts me in a naturally balanced position to speak on topics like this, particularly when it comes to like relations between black and white people, which are very sensitive topics. But I'm just going to touch on what I feel is relevant. And so if we look at this article, Shakur Stevenson, he specifically name drops Lomachenko and Alexander Usyk. And it's obvious why he does that, because they are guys, I guess he sees them as, you know, they're top pound for pound guys, they're technicians, they're pure boxers, as he probably categorizes himself and how many people in the boxing establishment would categorize him. But obviously, because they're white, he feels that that plays a large role in why they don't get the same criticism that he does for being boring. And now I take issue with that because I just don't think it's a very valid comparison to make. Because he talks about Lomachenko, for example, and he says, oh, you know, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you can see the article for yourself. He states that when Lomachenko has had less than stellar performances against, say, the likes of Jose Pedraza and Guillermo Rigondeaux, he basically says, oh, Lomachenko didn't get any criticism. And I don't think that is necessarily true, and I don't think it's particularly valid as a comparison to make. Because if we look at that Pedraza fight, um, I don't remember many people labeling it as a boring fight, purely because it wasn't that boring. The early fight was actually fairly competitive. Pedraza was doing a lot of good work. But then we started to see, as we've seen so many times before, Lomachenko really start to go through the gears when he senses that he needs to start to get a foothold in a fight. So many times you'll see Lomachenko go through the gears, and he's a technician, yes. He's a boxer, yes. He has a lot of skill. And like many boxers, he tries to limit the amount he gets hit. Obviously, he still does get hit, but he does a good job of kind of maintaining his defense. But he also tries to maximize his offense as well. That's why so many people love Lomachenko, is because not only does he put on these really skillful displays, but he can be a very aggressive fighter. And he's willing to go through those gears and really turn up the heat on an opponent and try and get an opponent out of there. He had that string of just stopping opponent after opponent after opponent. Some instances, like the Rocky Martinez fight, he knocked him out damn near cold after basically dissecting him. And so there's a reason why many people don't call Lomachenko boring, is because they don't find him boring, because he's someone who's aggressive, willing to engage, throws a lot of punches, and is willing to force a stoppage, as well as displaying his, immense skill and talent. Shakur Stevenson also brings up the Rigondeaux fight. And now that was a boring fight. That was a poor fight. Nobody is going to say otherwise. But then he talks about how he was barely landing on Rigondeaux. And, he wasn't getting labelled boring for that. Well, that's not true. Vasily Lomachenko landed plenty on Rigondeaux. It was actually the other way around. Rigondeaux didn't land anything on Lomachenko. And the reason why he did that was because Rigondeaux it was so obvious he was just content to spoil in that fight. He was holding on for dear life. He was obstructing his targets. Like, he was turning away from Lomachenko. He was ducking below the waist, things that you're not allowed to do. And as I say, just generally trying to spoil the fight. And so people acknowledge that that was a poor fight, which obviously is one of Lomachenko's fights. But anyone who actually watched it saw that that fight wasn't a poor fight because of Lomachenko. It was because of Rigondeaux, who is the black fighter for what that's worth. And so going to Alexander Usyk, again, fits into a similar mold. He's one of these pound for pound guys who's an elite level technician, is a boxer, someone who kind of embodies that spirit of hitting and not getting hit. Like, you can maximize your defense, that's fine. But what are you going to do about your offense? Lomachenko and Usyk are two guys who maximize their defense as best they can, but they don't do it at the expense of being willing to engage an opponent and lay a smackdown on them. Like, that's really just the long and the short of it. They're guys who are technical, yes, but they're willing to engage, and they're willing to turn up the heat on an opponent. And they're in meaningful fights that people want to see. Like, you look at Usyk's fight against Tyson Fury. That was a very entertaining fight to watch, particularly live, because there was drama in it. There were competitive moments, but you ultimately saw a guy in Alexander Usyk use his ability, use his skill, and almost take Tyson Fury out in a historical and meaningful fight that people were invested in. Not only were they invested in the performances of both men, they were invested in the event itself. And then you can obviously go back to the AJ fights, which probably weren't the most entertaining, but once again, people give, say, Alexander Usyk credit because they see how he's using his skill to put on a display where he's willing to engage his opponent, willing to put a beating on him, using his skill and his talent. And even if you want to go a step further, let's look at other fighters from the same demographic as Shakur Stevenson, these young black fighters. And this fighter isn't young anymore, but he's still a black fighter, and once upon a time he was young, and that's Terence Crawford. And I want to say more so before the Madrimov fight, because that was a little bit of a flat performance. Although I haven't seen many people say it was boring. I think many people found it to be quite intriguing. People give Crawford a lot of credit because, once again, a technician, a guy who tries to box, tries to maximize his defense and his offense. Terence Crawford is a brilliant finisher, and he gets credit for being a finisher, and that's why people want to see him fight, is because, okay, you got this guy tremendously skilled, but he's also got power, and if he gets you hurt, he's going for you. He's going to set about you like a rabid dog, and he's probably going to take you out. Look how many stoppages Terence Crawford got in a row, and a lot of them were brutal stoppages. Look at the Spence fight. People found that entertaining because it was dramatic. People are bloodthirsty. They want to see people get damaged in the boxing ring. Very few people turn up to see, pit-pat, amateur style boxing. Some people do appreciate it, and fair enough, you like what you like. But many people, I'd argue the majority of people, they want to see blood, guts and drama. It's really that simple, and if you can do it with skill, brilliant. If you can't, I'll take it anyway. I've gone on record saying, this is obviously anecdotal, on this channel I only cover fights that I'm interested in. And I love skill, I love technique. You can look at some of the breakdowns I've done. I love the detail of boxing. But at the same time, I want to see some damage get inflicted on someone. Call it callous, call it brutal, but that's just the truth. And I think people who try and pretend otherwise, they love the gentlemanly sport of pugilism, I think you're coping, in all honesty. You want to see people get hurt, but at the same time, a lot of these guys, they can't separate from their fanboyism, so they might love Shakur Stevenson because they feel he represents them and they want to back him until their dying breath. But the truth is, you might love Shakur Stevenson for whatever reason, but most people just don't find him that entertaining, and there's a reason for it. It's because, yes, he's tremendously skilled, and he's a great boxer, he's got great IQ, great technique. I'll give him that credit, and I admire him for it. And obviously, he's doing his thing, trying to change his life. But nobody watches Shakur Stevenson and thinks, you know what, I can't wait to see this guy fight again. It just doesn't happen, because his fights are boring. He puts in boring performances. And going back to examples from his own demographic of young black fighters, who is one of the most entertaining fighters of the entire history of boxing? Is Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, if you ask 99% of people, will say Mike Tyson was their favorite fighter growing up. So many people will do it. Maybe 99% is a stretch, but the vast majority recognize Mike Tyson as one of the most entertaining fighters in history. And a prime Mike Tyson, the meme, everybody likes prime Mike Tyson. A prime Mike Tyson wasn't getting hit that much. He was renowned for his head movement, and he was able to avoid getting hit but still knock people out cold. Crazy knockouts, big punches, insane combinations, insane displays of athleticism. But he's a young black fighter. So you can kind of get the gist of what I'm saying. I don't agree with what Shakur Stevenson says, and I've got a lot of admiration for Shakur Stevenson, but I think he has to really take accountability. Don't play the race card, because it just doesn't hold up to scrutiny when you look at it objectively. And now I appreciate he's come from a certain environment where I'm sure he's had to deal with all kinds of bias against him. That does exist. I've experienced it. And as I say, I belong to both communities, to the white and the black community. So, you can't tell me that I haven't, I don't know what I'm talking about, because believe me, I do. But in this instance, I just don't think it holds up. If Shakur Stevenson wants to be recognized as an entertaining fighter, he's going to have to start making his fights entertaining. And that's going to involve using his skill, yes, but not being so careful, being willing to engage an opponent, being willing to go through the motions, go through the gears more and put a beating on his opponent, because that's what people want to see. It's prize fighting at the end of the day, and people only pay for what they want to see. And right now, people don't want to pay to see Shakur Stevenson because of the way he fights. But they'll happily give their money to another fighter who, is entertaining. Look how many pay-per-views Joshua was doing in his heyday, a young black fighter. And yes, he's UK based, but You know, people were showing out to see him because they knew there's going to be drama, there's going to be knockouts, there's going to be action. So, yeah, just my take on this. Nearly 15 minutes of waffling, but a very sensitive, divisive topic, but I hope I've given a balanced opinion. Let me know yours in the comment section below. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next video.